Toka, you came here looking for help with this new Frankish threat. The Raven Clan will answer your call. Eivor Varinsdottir, 886. Hello, I'm Andrew, and I want to welcome you to Visions of the Past, a podcast all about the lore of Assassin's Creed. This is episode 88, and today we're going to do something that is a little bit different for this podcast. Today, we're going to talk about my thoughts on the most recent DLC for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, The Siege of Paris. While there will be spoilers during this conversation, I'm not going to go into a full breakdown of the story. With that being said, I think the best thing to do would be to leave those spoilery bits for the end when we talk about characters and the story bits that I really like from Siege of Paris. One of the things that I've noticed with Assassin's Creed Valhalla in general is that the scenery and the landscapes are beautiful. Siege of Paris kind of takes that up a notch. It's one of those things that actually took me by surprise, even within the cinematics. I found myself constantly taking photos. And I haven't really done that yet with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, at least not on this scale. I found that I took well over 100 photos throughout my time in the DLC, and I came nowhere near that with Assassin's Creed Valhalla's main game or the Wrath of the Druids DLC. It was just one of those things that everywhere I looked, I saw a beautiful landscape, a beautiful setup between two characters. I have this one shot that I absolutely love of Odo's wife, Theodred, just kind of side-eyeing Eivor, and it's amazing from my point of view. But that's not really the only thing that I liked about this DLC. There is new abilities, my favorite being the Plague of Rats. It's very fun, at least from my point of view, to set that off and just watch these plague rats just devour enemies. And it's 1, 2, 3, it's all, the bigger the group, the better. These rats are just ravenous. And it's an ability that gives you this quick way to go through so many enemies without having to be overly sneaky or worry about, am I going to stab this guy and then that guy and then I have to get my sword out for this one or that one. It really simplifies your progress through a crowded area. Speaking of ways to get through a crowded area, one of the things that I really am not a fan of is the new weapons, scythes. They're too big, too slow, and while there is a challenge within Ubisoft Connect for 100 kills, I find it a drag to get. And it's just, I don't care for those weapons. I'd rather carry 2 spears and just be fast, quick, and in a hurry and move on to the next guy instead of swinging my scythe around, hoping I'll get a hold of somebody and then move on. The animations for its deaths are actually pretty cool though, and I would say that that is a highlight, at least for me. Another bit of gameplay, I guess you could say, that I enjoy are the rebellion missions. They do get repetitive after a certain point, but they're a nice bit of content that you can keep redoing to add items and new runes to your inventory. It's something I didn't expect to be as vast as it was. Fortunately, now that means it's time to get into the little bits of the story. And I know this part isn't going to be for everyone, so I'm going to try to keep things kind of vague, but I will end up getting into some spoiler thoughts through here. I'm a really big fan of the 3 main women outside of Eivor. Toka, Richardis, and Theodred. To me, they really are the crux of this DLC. You have these women holding up these men in ways that the men don't even realize they're being held up. And I have numerous photos based on their characters and their story arcs that I haven't shared yet, but they're amazing, at least to me, and I love the way that they go through. Speaking of character journeys, one thing I wasn't a fan of was the Bellatorus die. The marketing for Siege of Paris made me believe that we were going against a offshoot of the Order of the Ancients, and that wasn't the case. The Bellatorus die were never mentioned or connected to the Order of Ancients that I saw. If there is a document somewhere that does that connection, I completely missed it, which is possible because the central part of Paris, the Ile de Cité, was and is completely locked off except for one segment of the story, unless, of course, you go through and do a very specific trick to climb through the ramparts. But speaking on the Bellatorus die, the characters were fine. I just expected them to be Order of the Ancient members, and I shouldn't have. I should have known better, but I didn't, and I was let down, at least in that aspect. One thing about them that I absolutely did love, though, was the assassination missions to kill their members. These are the black box missions that were hyped up at the beginning of the marketing, where they said you could do this or do that and find your own way. And they brought this back from Assassin's Creed Unity, and seeing the parallels of Paris to Paris was something I didn't miss, and I loved it. I feel that these are the missions that should have been throughout Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Every major assassination through the story should have had one of these black box missions. They are amazing. And to see the cutscenes that they made specifically for doing certain things, they were great. There's one that sticks out in my head of a cross falling, and to me, it just was like, oh, that was great. The last bit I want to talk about is Charles the Fat. And I wouldn't necessarily say Charles is the main antagonist. He is a big one in the game, but I wouldn't necessarily go so far as saying main antagonist. I would lead that to the Bellatorus die. Absolutely. But he's a big one. And not just size, because he's a brute of a man. There is something within him, and to me, it screams sage. Every little bit of information that we are given about him says this man's a sage. He talks to himself in different voices, much like... Actually, I don't remember sages actually talking to themselves. They seemed a little bit kooky, but not like having full-on conversations with themselves like Charles did. But they mention that he was burned often as a child and that he was possessed by a demon. And it's one of those things where you can totally see the parallels to him being a sage. But for the life of me, I have no idea who the Isu would be that he's a sage of. I can't think off of the top of my head of a mythological deity that was killed by fire that would have lived around Francia. I don't know enough about mythology to know that off the top of my head. But he is, to me, a sage. And even if it hasn't been necessarily said, this man's a sage, flat out. I do like the fact that he kind of talks to himself and they talk about fire, because there is a story historically of Charles the Fat on how he was possessed by a demon as a child. So it's nice to see that they used that historical story to possibly make Charles the Fat a sage. Overall, though, I did enjoy the Siege of Paris. I don't know personally if it's worth $35, especially compared to Wrath of the Druids being $25. It was actually quite interesting to me to see that when Siege of Paris dropped, the season pass for Assassin's Creed Valhalla was on sale, making it even cheaper than either of the DLCs alone. Is it worth playing? Yeah, it is, especially if you can get the season pass on a discount. I think there's enough content there to warrant getting the season pass. I just don't know if it's worth $35 alone. Personally, I am excited to get back into Paris and take more pictures. I want to try to get into the Ile de Cité and take photos in the Ezio outfit and possibly even the Altair outfit, much like I did with London and the Ezio outfit a couple weeks ago. And I can't wait to finish the achievement list as well as the Rebellion mission's notoriety. But what is it that you think about the Siege of Paris DLC? Let me know over on Twitter at visions_AC. And thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for new podcast episodes. If you love the stories about Assassin's Creed lore, please follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. And tell your friends about this podcast as well. If you have any questions about Assassin's Creed or topics you'd like me to cover, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at visions_AC, and you can find those links in the show notes below. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed. And to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.